Hi everyone. So picking up from last week's video, I wanted to go through Power Pivot and a little bit of data modeling. And in my opinion, a much easier way than using VLOOKUPs and XLOOKUPs. I've never even really used an XLOOKUP, but I know that data modeling and Power Pivot is a much easier solution going forward, much quicker as well. And the beauty is you can apply this to Excel and also Power BI. So you can utilize both tools. You don't need to be familiar with Power BI to utilize Power Pivot and data modeling. It does exist in Excel. So I guess the first thing that we're going to do is go through why would you want to use a VLOOKUP? So if there's anyone watching this video that doesn't really understand what a VLOOKUP is, I'll demonstrate where you use it and why you use it. And then we'll go through the solution of using Power Pivot, which is located up here. You do need to enable that in the settings. I think it's files, options. I can't actually remember where within here. I think it's add-ins. I think it's Power Pivot is in here somewhere. Yeah, so Microsoft Power Pivot for Excel. So you do need to have that selected, but there is no extra cost to it or anything like that. So where a VLOOKUP is used is you'll start to notice that there's a lot of like ID keys in tables if you're working with data. And you can see here that this is saying that GL group ID 59, but what if you want the actual description of what is that GL group? So you can see here that GL account ID 364, that is the description of that GL account. So we have that, but we don't have the description of the group. So what we can do is we can go to here and we can filter this table, and we can filter it for 59. Sorry, this column here, and filter it for 59. And then we can see, okay, that's investment accounts, which makes sense because this looks like, an investment GL account. But what if we want to add that into this actual table? Well, the way we would do that is you can insert a column and you can do a VLOOKUP. And it's not that complex. But in my opinion, the second approach that we're going to take is better and quicker. So if we call this the GL group description, the way it works is you say equals VLOOKUP. I'm not going to spend too much time on the actual VLOOKUP because the purpose of this video is to demonstrate a better approach than a VLOOKUP. So we're going to look up this key 59 and we're going to go row by row. And we're going to look it up in this because we know it exists in this tab. And we're going to look it up in there. So it should find it 59. And we want to pull in the second column because that's the description. And we want an exact match, which is why we're going to say 0, which is just equivalent of the false there. We click that. So that's brought in the investment account. So if we just bring this out a little bit, we know that that's right. So you can apply that down and it's fairly good. Now that didn't take a long time, but it can be quite annoying to keep doing that whenever you paste in new data. And a lot of the time, whenever you're working with formulas like this in Excel, they can really slow the spreadsheet down or they can make them crash sometimes. So a better approach, in my opinion, is to utilize Power Pivot and data modeling within Excel, and then just utilize Power BI, which is essentially data modeling. So if we delete this column out for now, and what we could do is the first thing that you need to do, it's very similar to Power Query, is we need to format our spreadsheets and all of the data within that as a table. So to enable us to work with it in Power Pivot, it needs to be formatted as a table. So I can click Control and I think it is L. Yeah, and that is a little shortcut to create a table. Click OK there, and I'm going to rename this the GL data. Now, it is important to rename your tables correctly because we're going to be working with multiple tables, as you'll see. I have a small one here as well. So I'm going to, again, Control and L, and I'll show the other way to create a table in a second. So that's GL type. And then finally, we'll do the group. Another way to do it is, if I just unfilter this, is to, again, just select everything that's in the table and then click on Insert and click on Table. And that's another way. We want to make sure that this is ticked, by the way, because we do have column headers or headers within our table. So we click OK, and we're going to call that one GL group. Click enter. That's our 3 tables. So the next step then is we'll go back to the first one, click on Power Pivot and click on add to the data model. So that's going to bring up Power Pivot. Similar to Power Query, it's going to bring up a new tab. And that's basically added now into Power Pivot. What we're going to do as well is we're going to go back to, that's Power BI, sorry, we're going to go back to the other spreadsheet, and we're going to add this one. So we're going to say add to the data model. Okay, so I need to come back in here. I don't actually use Power Pivot that much. So what I'll do is, so it has GL group, GL data. So we need one more table. It's not showing. So if I click in existing connections, no, not there. So I use Power BI more than I use this. So what we'll do is file, click on save, and we'll just close it actually. So usually I'm used to Power Query where you get like an option to close and apply, but this doesn't seem to exist within Power Pivot, and it seems to be frozen actually. No, it's still loading here at the bottom right. Okay, that's closed. So I think it was GL group as well. So I'm going to add that to the data model. So I've GL, this table has already been added. Okay, so it's bottom left, cool. So I'll just close that out. So it's GL type that we want to add. So make sure add to data model. And that should be all three tables and three columns in the bottom, or sorry, three separate tables. So we should see GL type get loaded in now in a second. Perfect, okay. So the way that we want to, what we want to do next then is we want to build the relationships between our tables. And the way you do that is you do it using unique keys. So we're going to click on diagram view. And what we're going to do is we're going to build the relationships, and I'll show you how easy it is to build the relationships. So we're going to focus on the first two tables, which is the GL data and the GL group data. So within the GL group data, there is a unique ID for every single GL group. And what you need to do is you need to find that essentially that matching column in the table that you want to look it up on. And you just drag it and drop it like that. And what happens there is it creates a relationship between those two tables that allows them to talk to each other. And you'll see that the one on this side is because there's only one row for every single GL group. There can't be two of the same GL groups with different descriptions. That wouldn't make sense. But there can be repeating values because obviously there can be multiple entries in a nominal ledger for a GL group. So what we'll do as well is if we scroll down to the bottom, we can also see GL type. So it's essentially the exact same for the GL type. We want to build, and this is it's all very, very small, but this is a data model. So what we'll do now is, I just want to see, okay, yes, switch to workbook. So I'm going to save that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on switch to workbook, which should allow me. So what we'll do now is we will essentially insert a pivot table. So if we come in here and if we click on insert pivot table, rather than from a table or range, we're going to say from the data model. So, and we're going to just say the existing worksheet, which is fine. Click on OK. And that will read our data that we have in there, as you can see. So if you remember, if we jump back to the GL account tab here, we have the problem that we had was we had the GL group ID, but we didn't have the description. So if we drag that in now, so if we click here, so the GL data, GL group ID in the row, and if we had, I think we had the description of the actual GL ID, and if we drag in the current balance into the values, so what we have here is we have the GL account description, we have the GL group ID. What we could also do as well is we could add in the GL from the other table. So come up here, or should be allow me to minimize that, and go to the GL group and drag in the GL group description rather than the ID, have the description. So we can see here now that you don't need to do any VLOOKUPs. So if we come and we just double check one of them, so it's saying the bank charges is the GL group ID number 10. So if we come in here and if we filter this for number 10, just to make sure that it's going to be, first of all, it's bringing in the correct current balance. So 4291. there's that number. And what it's saying for the GL group ID description is bank charges. So that's up here. And then the actual GL account description is also bank charges. So what we'll do is we'll go to GL group and we'll filter that for number 10 to see if that says bank charges. What we might do is take a better example that has a different GL account description as the GL group description. So if we come back in here and we take a better one, so buildings, this is probably a better one. So number 14. So if we go in here and we filter this for 14, click OK. There, it's working straight away. So data modeling within Excel, I very rarely use it because what I'm about to show now is I think Power BI is a better solution, because whenever you're analyzing this data, usually people are visual and they want to see it in visuals. And you can do all of this, this wouldn't really be regarded as a visual. It's really just a table with data, but you can do it in Power BI anyway. So in my opinion, I would always lean towards doing any of this type of analysis in Power BI, and it doesn't take as long as people think to get up to speed with Power BI. So what we'll do now is we will go back to the GL data. Oh, this is that spreadsheet now. So I'm going to delete that tab. We don't really need that anymore. That was just to show how Power Pivot and data modeling was working within Excel. And I'm going to save this spreadsheet. So I'll just click, make sure actually I know where it is saved so I can tell Power BI where to read it from. So I have this in, okay, I think I know where that's saved. Cool. All right, so I'm going to just save it as actually on my desktop, just in case I can't navigate it. So browse, and we'll go to desktop, save. So how would we do that in Power BI? Now, the first thing to show with Power BI is you can turn a feature on and off, and I'm not going to go into too much detail as why you would want to have it off. Essentially, where you need to be careful with having this feature turned on automatically is it will slow reports down as you build more and more tables. And the feature that I'm talking about is Power BI's ability to automatically create those relationships between the tables. So how do you turn it off? Firstly, so you come into File, you go to Options and Settings, and you click on Options. And you'll have a couple of options for this report only, but then all reports going forward. So if we look at the data load for all of the reports going forward, or actually this one's probably a better one to use. So you can see here relationships. So import relationships from the data sources on the first load and auto detect new relationships after the data is loaded. So what we'll do is we'll keep it ticked for now. What I would usually do is tick that off, because again, whenever you're connecting to maybe 50 or 60 tables from like a SQL database, there's lots of relationships that will be built that you won't necessarily use or need, and that really slows refreshes down in Power BI. So I always untick it, but in this case, I'm just going to show people that you don't necessarily need to understand why and how to build the relationships, albeit it's very advisable, because Power BI can do it for you. So if I click on cancel here, what we're going to do is we're going to get the data. It's an Excel workbook, so we're going to click that. It's navigated at our desktop, and there it is there. And we'll let it load. It'll probably open up an option to go into Power Query. We don't need to do that. So there's our three tables: GL data, GL group, and GL type. So we'll select all three. We're not going to do any transformation steps on the data. That's what we did last week on Power Query. We're just going to load it directly into Power BI straight away. And whenever this loads, what I'll do is I'll not even bother going into the diagram view, which is, be very similar to what we were seeing in Excel. I'll click on the diagram view after, but we'll test and see. Let's pretend you don't even know why this exists and you're just trying to analyze this data. So we have the GL data here. So if we can remember, the description column was just the actual GL account code description. So if we come up here and we can probably look at the table view to get a better look first. So we have GL account ID, and there is data there. It's just not taking a while. So we have GL account ID and description. So let's bring those in. So if we come down here and we say GL account ID, and if we drag in as well the description of that GL account here, I'm going to make this into a table just so it's easy. So it's automatically summing them up. I don't want it to do that, so I'm going to click on Don't Summarize. and I'm going to click on the description here, and finally I'm going to click on the current balance, which is down here. Okay, so we already have that in the table. Oh, some of that's the wrong one I brought in, so I want to see this. So we already have that. There's nothing really to see there. And we also have the GL group ID. So if we drag in the GL group ID, that should come in no problem. It's not coming from a separate table. But again, what if someone wants to see, well, what is the description of that group? So let's go see what happens if we try and drag that in from the table without, looking at the relationships view. So if we drag in the description here, so after the GL group, and move the GL account description up here. So we want to rename this to GL account description. And you can see it automatically reads the GL group description as well. So if we hover over here and rename it so people can actually see it on the visual. So GL group description. So again, we can test it really quickly. So 66, what is that actually loan interest? So come to GL group, go to GL group ID, come in and search for equals 66. And it does equal loan interest. And so how did Power BI know that actually is loan interest, even though it's coming from a different table? So what you can see, the way Power BI works is whenever you have a visual selected, all of the fields that are on that visual are highlighted in green. So you can have my current balance and my GL account description within the GL data table. But if I scroll further down, I also have that GL group description. And how it knows is because we had that box ticked, Power BI automatically created a relationship between the GL group and the GL data tables. Now, interestingly, it didn't do it for the GL type. So if we come in here and if we look at the tables of data, and if we have GL group, and if we unfilter this, and this is what will happen when you don't have a relationship built. So within the GL group table, we also have GL type. So again, if we filter on that number, which was the loan interest, I think it was 66. Yeah. So let's see, what do we think that GL type would be? So let's just focus on 166. So that's GL type 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build another table and show you what happens when you don't have the relationships built. So click Control C, Control V, just to copy that visual. I'm going to drag it down. I'm going to delete it. And I want only the GL group ID. And we're only going to focus on 66 because just to make it a little bit easier. So we're going to filter this to say basic filtering. And we're going to say it's 66. So come up here, there. So it should be loan interest. So again, I can drag in the GL type ID, no problem, because that's within the same table. But what happens when I try and drag in the actual description of that GL type? So if we look at number 1, we know it's income from this table. But if I try and drag that in here, I get an error, and it's saying it can't determine the relationship. So it's giving you a little bit of a hint. So all we need to do is we need to come back in here and we need to build that relationship. So I certainly would advise that you understand what you're doing if you're importing data into Power BI and building out relationships between tables, because as you've seen, even though we did select that option to automatically detect relationships, it didn't detect the relationships between these two tables. So I'm going to build that relationship. What it's saying here is are you making it active? What type of relationship? So again, there's only one row for each GL type in the GL type table, and there's multiple rows in the GL data table. So we're going to click on save. And actually what I should have done is I should have built it also to the GL group. So I can come over here and also build a second relationship to the GL group. And that will fix my visual. So apologies, what I'll do is I'm going to delete this one for now actually. And I'm going to rebuild it just directly to the GL group so you can see how the visual fixes itself. So come back here, drag it over to the GL type. Click on save. So I'll come back into my report view. And now my visual is showing up correctly, and it's showing up that that is the GL type of income. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, how data modeling and Power Pivot work both in Excel. As you've seen, I'm not that familiar with Power Pivot in Excel because I basically do absolutely everything in Power BI. I don't really input data into Excel just as part of my job. So that the only difference between, or the main difference between using Excel, in my opinion, in Power BI is you don't really input data back into directly into Power BI, whereas you usually do that with Excel. If you're doing any types of this type of analysis, building out pivot tables, building out any type of visuals, and again, this is technically a visual. I know it's just a table, but it's still a visual. I would certainly advise people to do it in Power BI, and hopefully people can see how actually easy it is compared to understanding how XLOOKUPs and VLOOKUPs work. If you're familiar with them, I'm sure they're quite easy. If you're not familiar with them, I think that this is a much easier and essentially an easier way to understand how to connect the tables essentially and analyze data all in one location.